It can build a man up, make him feel strong, invincible even, but at the same time, it can be the very thing that keeps him locked inside his own mind, unable to say the words he truly feels. And that's exactly what's happening here. He's thinking about you more than you realize, more than he even wants to admit to himself. But his pride, his ego, it won't let him say it. You see, when a man walks away or lets you walk away, a part of him convinces himself that it was the right decision. Maybe he told himself he didn't need you. Maybe he convinced himself he was better off alone. But here's what pride doesn't tell him in the moment. What happens when the silence gets too loud? What happens when he wakes up in the middle of the night, reaching for something that isn't there? What happens when he starts to replay memories, feeling something in his chest that he doesn't want to acknowledge? That's when pride starts to turn into a prison. Because now, even though his heart is screaming for you, his mind won't let him make a move. It's not that he doesn't care. It's not that he doesn't miss you. It's that he's trapped. Trapped between what he feels and what he wants the world to see. And the worst part? The longer he waits, the harder it gets to break free. The more time passes, the more his pride builds walls around him. He starts to think, what if she's moved on? What if she doesn't even care anymore? And instead of risking the pain of finding out, he stays silent. He tells himself, if she wanted me, she would reach out. And so he waits. But deep down, every time he sees something that reminds him of you, every time he hears your name, every time he catches a glimpse of something that takes him back to when things were good, he feels it, that pull, that longing, that regret. But he pushes it down because pride tells him that to reach out would mean admitting that he was wrong, that he made a mistake. And for some men, that's harder to do than anything else. Because to admit that would mean facing the truth, that he let something real slip away. He might distract himself, he might act like he's fine, but understand this, the battle isn't happening in the world you can see. It's happening inside him, in his mind. And that's the hardest battle of all. Because no matter how strong he wants to seem, no matter how much he pretends, his thoughts keep coming back to one thing, you. And the truth is, there will come a moment when he realizes that pride has cost him more than he was willing to lose. But by then, it just might be too late. He tells himself he's fine, that he doesn't need to say anything, that if you wanted to talk, you'd reach out first. But deep down, he knows that's not the truth. Deep down, his mind is running in circles, replaying moments, questioning his decisions, wondering what would happen if he just swallowed his pride and made that call. But here's the problem. Pride and fear work together. Pride tells him, you don't need her, you're strong without her. Fear whispers, but what if she's moved on? What if she doesn't even care anymore? And so he sits there, convincing himself that silence is the best option, that staying quiet is better than facing the possibility that you don't need him the way he needs you. He might try to distract himself. He'll bury himself in work, go out more, pick up new habits, maybe even try to start something new with someone else. But it never quite fills the space, because no matter what he does, your presence lingers. He hears your voice in quiet moments. He remembers the way you laughed, the way you made him feel, the way you understood him in a way no one else did. And no matter how much he tries to push it away, it always comes back. See, men don't always process loss the same way women do. For women, the pain comes first, the healing follows. But for men, they delay it. They pretend it doesn't exist. They push it down, down, down until one day it all rises to the surface. And when that day comes, it hits hard. And suddenly he's realizing that what he lost wasn't just a relationship. It wasn't just a person. It was peace. It was something real. That's when the questions start haunting him. Did I make the right choice? Could I have done more? Was it really worth it to let her go? But instead of acting, instead of reaching out, instead of admitting what he already knows, he stays silent. He hopes, deep down, that maybe you'll make it easy for him. That maybe, just maybe, you'll break the silence first. But what he doesn't realize is that by the time he finally understands what he lost, you've already started healing. You've already learned to live without him. And every moment he spends thinking instead of acting, that's just another moment he's letting you slip further away. He scrolls through his phone, his thumb hovering over your name. He starts typing a message, then deletes it again and again. Because deep down, he wants to reach out. He wants to hear your voice, but his pride won't let him. He tells himself that if you wanted to talk, you'd be the one to make the first move. And so, he waits. He lets the silence grow, hoping it won't turn into distance he can never close. At first, he convinced himself that he was fine, that life goes on, that he didn't need you as much as he thought. Maybe he even started going out more, surrounding himself with people, trying to fill the space where you used to be. But no matter what he did, nothing quite measured up. Because you weren't just another person in his life. You were the one who saw him, really saw him. And when someone like that walks away, it leaves a mark, a void, a silence that no amount of noise can cover up. See, men process things differently. In the beginning, they feel free, like they've got the whole world ahead of them. But as time passes, reality sets in. He starts to realize that the things he used to take for granted, the way you checked on him, the way you knew what he needed before he even had to say it, the way you made life feel lighter, those things weren't just small details. They were the foundation of something real. And now that foundation is gone. But instead of facing it, instead of admitting that he misses you, he lets pride take over. Pride tells him if she really cared, she'd be here. Pride convinces him that silence is a strategy, not a mistake. And so he does nothing. He sits with his thoughts, replaying memories, wondering what you're doing, wondering if you ever think about him the way he thinks about you. But he won't say it. He won't show it, because that would mean admitting he was wrong. And this is where he loses. Not because he doesn't care, not because he doesn't want to fix it, but because he let too much time pass. Because he believed silence would somehow keep him in control. But what he doesn't realize is that while he's stuck in his own pride, you're learning to live without him. You're learning that love isn't about waiting for someone to swallow their pride. It's about being with someone who never lets it get in the way to begin with. He tells himself he's fine. He goes about his days, keeping busy, filling his time with distractions. But deep down, there's an emptiness he can't quite shake. Because every quiet moment, every pause in the conversation, every drive home alone, his mind drifts back to you. The way you used to look at him, the way you understood him without him having to explain. He remembers it all, and yet he won't say a word. Because saying something would mean admitting that he made a mistake. Pride is a dangerous thing. It convinces him that silence is strength, that waiting it out is a form of power. He tells himself if she really cared, she'd reach out first. But what he doesn't realize is that silence doesn't make you chase. It makes you move on. At first, maybe you checked your phone, wondering if he'd send a message. Maybe you even thought about reaching out yourself. But as time passed, you started to understand something. If he truly valued what you had, he wouldn't need you to remind him of it. And yet, he still believes there's time, that one day, when he's ready, he can just reach out and things will fall back into place. He doesn't see that every day he stays silent, he loses a piece of you. He doesn't understand that love doesn't wait around for someone to finally set their ego aside. See, in his mind, he's still holding on to you. But in reality, you've already started to let go. And that's the irony of it all. He spends so much time convincing himself that he doesn't need to say anything, that he doesn't need to be vulnerable. But in the end, his silence costs him everything. Because the moment he finally decides to reach out, the moment he finally realizes he can't replace you, it's already too late. He keeps replaying the past in his mind, wondering if you're doing the same. He convinces himself that you must be thinking about him too, that you must be missing him just as much. But here's the truth. While he's lost in the memories, you've been learning to live without him. And that realization, that's what terrifies him the most. At first, he thought space would be good. He thought time would work in his favor, that by staying quiet, he was maintaining control. But time doesn't always heal, it reveals. And what it revealed to him was that you were never the one who needed to change. He was. He starts to realize that everything he thought he could replace about you, your patience, your presence, your energy, was never just something to find in someone else. Because what you gave him wasn't just attention, wasn't just affection, it was connection. And real connection, that doesn't come around every day. But here's the problem. By the time he realizes it, you've already started rebuilding yourself. You've already started putting the broken pieces of yourself back together, but this time without him in the picture. And nothing shakes a person more than seeing someone they once thought would always be there, learning to live without them. And now, the pride that kept him from reaching out, it starts to crumble. Because now it's not just about missing you. It's about knowing that he no longer has access to you. That the version of you that loved him, waited for him, hoped for him, that version doesn't exist anymore. He lost you not when he walked away, but when he assumed you'd wait forever. And now he understands that silence wasn't power, it was the biggest mistake he ever made. He sees you moving forward, flourishing, and it strikes him like a wake-up call. He watches you living the life he thought he could always be a part of, and that feeling of powerlessness consumes him. But there's a deeper layer here. You didn't just move on from him. You moved on because you found your own strength. And that strength, that independence, was something he never truly understood until now. He always thought he had control, that he was the one who could dictate the terms of the relationship. But now, he's witnessing the consequences of that thinking. The thing is, pride doesn't let you admit vulnerability. It doesn't let you express regret in the moment it matters most. So he's left with this internal battle, torn between the desire to reach out to you, to reclaim what was once his, and the nagging feeling that it's too late. His pride tells him to stay quiet, to hold on to the illusion that everything's fine, that he's better off without you. But deep down, he knows the truth. He knows he's losing you for good. He knows the door you once left ajar is now closed, and he's standing outside, locked out by his own pride. And here's where the real shift happens. While he's still caught up in his pride, you've shifted into a place where your own value is no longer tied to him. Your growth, your transformation, your ability to walk away when it was hard, that's what has made you strong. You've embraced the fact that you don't need anyone to complete you. You learn to stand on your own, to trust yourself, to trust your worth. And now he sees that, and that scares him. In his mind, he thought he was the one who would decide when things would change, but you've already changed. You changed for yourself, and that's what's left him in a state of confusion and regret. He's finally beginning to understand that while he was too proud to admit he made a mistake, you were strong enough to make the decision to grow, to heal, and to move on without him. And that's something he can't undo, no matter how hard he tries. It's a hard lesson for him to learn, but in time, the weight of his pride will break him down, and he will realize that the only way forward is to let go of the ego and try to find humility. But that path might be too late for him. He thought that as long as he maintained his pride, as long as he kept his emotional distance, he would remain in control. He convinced himself that his ego was a shield, protecting him from being vulnerable, from the pain of regret, and from the consequences of his actions. But in reality, pride isn't a shield. It's a cage. It's a barrier that separates him from the very thing he desires, you. He told himself that he could replace you, that he could move on and find someone else who could fill the void you left behind. But as time passed, he realized that no one can replace someone who genuinely adds value to your life, someone who knows you in ways no one else can. In his pride, he might have believed that his actions were justified, that he was too good to be wrong, that the relationship was disposable. But now, he stands alone in the quiet of his own mind, wrestling with the overwhelming truth. It wasn't the relationship that was flawed, it was his inability to recognize what he had until it was too late. And now, as he watches you grow, as you blossom into the person you were always meant to be, his pride no longer feels like power. It feels like a heavy burden, a weight that pulls him down, reminding him of what he lost. There's an old saying, you don't realize what you have until it's gone. For him, this is his harsh reality. The pride he once wore so proudly, the shield that he thought would protect him, has instead alienated him from the one person who truly mattered. And now, all he's left with is the painful knowledge that no matter how much he wants to, he can never go back and change what he did. The door is closed and the key lies in your hands. But you're no longer standing on the other side waiting for him to unlock it. What he doesn't see is that this pride, this wall he's built around himself, has done more than just keep him from you. It has kept him from learning the most important lesson. Vulnerability is not weakness, and humility is the gateway to real growth. In trying to protect himself from pain, he's locked himself out of the possibility of real connection, the kind of deep, meaningful bond that he had with you. He wants to call you, he wants to text you, he wants to take back the words and actions that pushed you away, but pride won't let him. It's ironic, pride that was supposed to keep him safe now isolates him. In the depths of his mind, he's beginning to understand that the very thing he relied on to protect himself is the thing that has ultimately destroyed any chance of reconciliation. But here's the thing about pride. It's a self-imposed prison, and the only way to escape it is through humility. The key to his release is letting go of the need to be right, to be in control, and to admit finally that he messed up. But by then, will you still be around? Will you still want him back after the time he wasted, the emotional distance he kept, and the emotional games he played? For him, the truth is starting to sting. He knows that no matter how many times he thinks about reaching out, his pride won't let him. And in that, he's learned the hardest lesson. Sometimes, pride is the very thing that keeps us from what we want most. And by the time he's ready to admit it, it's already too late. You've moved on. You found strength in your own worth. And he's left to ponder the very thing that caused him to lose you, the pride that kept him from reaching out, from being vulnerable, and from showing you the love you truly deserved. The lesson is harsh, but necessary. Pride, in the end, doesn't protect you, it isolates you. And that is why, no matter how much he wants you back, it may already be too late for him. He's realizing something now, something he didn't want to face before. He's not just losing you, he's losing himself. He thought he could play the game of distance, the game of keeping you on the edge, convincing himself that by holding back, by holding on to his pride, he could control the situation. But now, as the days go by, he's starting to see it clearly. In trying to hold on to control, he's lost everything that truly mattered. And in the end, he's left with the echo of his own empty decisions. At first, it was easy to justify the actions. It was easy to tell himself that he didn't need to reach out, that he didn't need to apologize, that he could carry on without acknowledging the void you left in his life. After all, he didn't want to appear weak. He didn't want to appear desperate or needy. But what he didn't understand, what his pride and his fear kept him from seeing, was that true strength isn't in avoidance, isn't in silence. It isn't in pretending you're unaffected. Real strength is in vulnerability. Real strength is in recognizing your mistakes, admitting them, and taking the necessary steps to correct them. And in not doing that, he's dug himself into a hole that's harder and harder to climb out of. There's something about human connection, something about relationships that doesn't make sense when you try to control it. You can't manipulate love. You can't dictate the rules of connection. You can't force someone to stay, to love you, to keep caring when you keep them at arm's length. And yet, that's exactly what he tried to do. He convinced himself that if he just played it cool, if he didn't let his guard down, if he didn't admit how much you meant to him, he could keep you around on his terms. But that strategy, that mentality, has come with a price. Now he's standing on the edge of realizing that the very thing he feared, losing you, was the result of his own pride and inability to face the truth of his feelings. The more time passes, the more his mind drifts back to the moments you shared. He replays those moments over and over in his head, wondering why he didn't see the importance of them then. Why didn't he show you the appreciation you deserved? Why didn't he express the emotions that were running deep within him? Why did he let his pride block the love he so desperately wanted to give? Now, as he watches you move on, as he sees you find peace, strength, and even joy without him, he can't help but feel the sting of regret. It wasn't just that he lost you. It's that he lost the chance to show you who he truly was. He never gave you the chance to see the vulnerable side of him, the side that cared, the side that could have built something real and lasting with you. And now, as he stands on the outside looking in, he understands the full cost of what his pride has taken from him. But even now, even after all of this, he struggles with his own pride. He still doesn't want to admit that he made a mistake. He doesn't want to be the one to reach out first, because doing so feels like a blow to his ego. But what he doesn't see is that his ego, his pride, is exactly what keeps him trapped. It's what keeps him from learning the most important lesson. Relationships aren't about control. They're about mutual respect, vulnerability, and understanding. As time continues to pass, the realization becomes undeniable. He wants you back, but his pride won't let him admit it. He wants to call you, to text you, to show you that he's changed. But every time he reaches for the phone, his pride pulls him back. He's stuck in a cycle, trapped in a battle between what his heart wants and what his ego demands. And in that battle, he's losing. Because while his pride may have been the thing that kept him from reaching out, it's also the thing that has now cost him the most important thing he had, you. What he doesn't understand is that this isn't just about the two of you. It's about his own personal growth, his own evolution. He has to learn that love, connection, and honesty cannot exist when pride is at the forefront. You cannot build a foundation with someone if you're more focused on winning the fight with your own ego than on actually opening up to the person who matters most. In the end, he'll find himself alone, not because you left, but because he pushed you away. And the worst part? He'll know he did it to himself. He will have sacrificed the love he could have had on the altar of pride. He'll realize that the one thing he truly wanted was always within his reach. He could have had it all, but he let his ego make the final decision. Pride doesn't protect you, it isolates you. And in the end, it's too late. He will realize that no amount of pride can bring back what he has lost. And that realization will sting like nothing else. He's spent so much time living under the weight of his own pride, and now as reality sets in, the truth is undeniable. The way he treated you is catching up with him. When you were in his life, when you were by his side, he took it all for granted. He was so wrapped up in his own world, so consumed by his own insecurities and fears that he couldn't see the value you brought into his life. And now, as time passes and he faces the consequences of his actions, the truth becomes crystal clear. The emptiness he feels isn't just from losing you, it's from realizing that he lost someone who truly cared, someone who had the ability to change his life. You were never asking for much. You didn't need grand gestures or constant validation. You simply needed him to be present, to show up, to be open. But he couldn't even do that. Instead, he played the games, pushing you away when you got too close, pulling you in when he needed validation, giving you just enough attention to keep you hanging on, but never enough to make you feel secure in his love. His fear of truly opening up to you, of truly letting you in, kept him locked in a cycle of emotional distance. He thought this was strength. He thought this was how you protect yourself, how you keep control. But now he sees how wrong he was. Now he sees how much he's lost by holding on to his pride. In hindsight, he wishes he had been different. He wishes he had let down his walls, been more vulnerable with you. He wishes he hadn't let his ego dictate his actions. Because now, as he watches you move on, as he sees you thriving without him, he realizes the one thing he didn't fully understand before. Love isn't about control. It's not about keeping someone at arm's length to protect yourself. It's about trust, about openness, about allowing yourself to be seen for who you truly are, flaws, mistakes, insecurities, and all. And he didn't do that. He never gave you the chance to see him as he truly is, to see the parts of him that were scared and vulnerable, because he thought showing that side would make him weak. But now he understands that true strength lies in embracing those parts of yourself and allowing someone you trust to see them too. And as he's reflecting on everything, he realizes something else. The worst part isn't just losing you, it's realizing that he could have had it all. He could have had the connection, the understanding, the love, but he let his pride rob him of that. He never let you in far enough, never trusted you enough to see his heart. And that's the heart-wrenching truth he's left to face now. It's not just that he wants you back. It's that he wants to make things right, but he doesn't know how to overcome the wall of pride he built between the two of you. The problem is his pride is still there, lurking in the background. It's stopping him from reaching out, stopping him from being honest with himself about what he really feels. It's telling him that reaching out would make him look desperate, that showing vulnerability would make him weak. But deep down, he knows the truth. He knows that it's not desperation to reach out. It's the only way to take responsibility for his actions, to admit he was wrong, to give you the respect you deserve. But even now, even as he's starting to understand how much he wants to make amends, his pride keeps him stuck. His fear of rejection, his fear of being vulnerable again, is paralyzing him. He's afraid that if he shows his true self, if he opens up, you'll see him as weak. Or worse, you'll turn away for good. But the truth is, the more he holds on to his pride, the more he pushes you further away. You've moved on. You're living your life, growing and evolving without him. You've learned how to love yourself, how to find happiness without relying on someone else's validation. And that's something he can't comprehend fully yet. He's still too caught up in the illusion that pride equals power. But what he doesn't realize is that by holding on to his pride, he's just isolating himself. The real power lies in being able to admit mistakes, to ask for forgiveness, to rebuild what's been broken, to show up as your true self, without fear, without shame. It's ironic, really. All this time, he thought that his pride was keeping him safe, keeping him in control. But now, as he sits with the consequences of his choices, he sees that it was his pride that kept him from experiencing real love, real connection. His pride built the walls between you and him, walls that are now too thick to easily tear down. He could have done things differently. He could have chosen you. He could have chosen vulnerability, communication, and honesty over fear, over pride, but he didn't. And now, that opportunity seems to be slipping away. But there's something else happening. In his deepest moments of reflection, as he struggles with his pride, he's beginning to understand the real lesson. Relationships aren't about perfection. They aren't about never making mistakes or always having it all together. They're about growth. They're about learning, adapting, and becoming better. Not just for yourself, but for the people you care about. And if there's any hope of ever reconnecting with you, he'll have to let go of his pride and embrace this lesson fully. In the end, he'll have to decide whether his pride is worth more than the chance to rebuild what was lost. And that's the hardest part, the realization that he alone controls his fate now. He has the power to choose vulnerability over pride, to choose connection over isolation, but that choice is his to make. Time will tell whether or not he can make it. Time will tell whether he'll finally let go of the thing that's been holding him back all along, his own pride. When we think about pride, we often see it as a protective shield, something that guards our hearts from hurt and rejection. But in truth, pride is just a barrier. It stops us from being vulnerable, from acknowledging our mistakes, and from truly connecting with others. In the case of someone who lost you because of their pride, that barrier has become their greatest enemy. At first, it felt like pride gave them control. It made them feel powerful, like they had the upper hand in the relationship. But now, as time passes, they're beginning to see how that very pride has isolated them. The reality is that pride isn't power, it's a cage. And when you're inside that cage, you can't move freely, you can't grow, and you certainly can't rebuild the bridges you burned. It's easy to hide behind pride, especially when you're afraid of being hurt. It's easier to say, I don't need anyone, or I'm better off alone, than to admit that you missed someone, that you made a mistake, or that you wish things had been different. But while pride can make you feel strong in the moment, it doesn't offer long-term satisfaction. It doesn't lead to fulfillment, and it doesn't bring happiness. What pride does is keep you stuck in the past. It stops you from moving forward, from healing, from being the person you could truly be. You get trapped in your own prideful thoughts, telling yourself you're fine, that you're better off without them, when deep down, you know you're not. And as time goes on, the realization hits. They can't avoid it any longer. The truth is staring them in the face. Their pride costs them the most valuable thing they have, the connection with you. And now they're left with the hollow feeling of regret, knowing that their pride kept them from seeing the love, the loyalty, and the potential that you brought into their life. At some point, the weight of their pride becomes too heavy to carry. The facade of being fine starts to crumble, and they begin to see the truth. They were never truly fine without you. They just couldn't admit it because of their pride. What's even more painful for them is knowing that it's too late to turn back time. They've made their choices, and now, as they reflect on everything, they understand how far they've pushed you away. You were never the problem. Their pride was. But now, their pride is stopping them from reaching out, from being vulnerable, and from taking the first step toward rebuilding what's been broken. And here's the thing, they're stuck in a cycle. They know they've made mistakes, but their pride won't let them apologize, won't let them reach out, won't let them show you the real side of them, the side that still cares, the side that regrets letting you slip away. What they don't realize is that in order to heal, in order to have any chance of rekindling what was lost, they will have to break down those walls they've built. They will have to lower their pride and come to terms with the fact that asking for forgiveness